Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Let's be honest, spooky old buildings and generational trauma still puts horror fan asses into seats. There's nothing wrong with using tried and true horror frameworks, but it's the ways in which a director explores that trauma and facilitates scares that ultimately separates the generic from the memorable. And to be fair, there's a considerable amount of good intentions behind writer and director Yoon Yen Kyung's directorial debut film Lingering, which is currently streaming on Shudder. Uncovering a family's tragic past, set against the backdrop of an eerie hotel, is as good a premise as any to set up scares. But whether or not those scares and mysteries hidden within the hotel's halls are memorable is where the real discussion of Lingering begins. Yumi's tragic past comes roaring back in her life when she's suddenly asked to become her younger sister Yoon Ji-Yu's adoptive guardian. Unable to adequately support her sister but unwilling to let her wind up in an orphanage, Yumi seeks a family friend, Young Seon, at her secluded hotel. Young Seon agrees to care for the child, but only if Yumi stays the weekend, an offer she regretfully obliges. From the moment we step foot into the hotel, we sense that something is off. This towering and glamorous hotel is empty except for the trio and a maid who spends her days drinking her fill of soju. Though these quiet halls are a screaming reminder of the pain that the hotel represents for Yumi and her baggage from her traumatic childhood. It doesn't take long into Yumi and Yoon Ji-Yu's stay for strange hauntings to occur, and they'll have to unravel the mystery of their family's past if they wish to survive the weekend. To its credit, Lingering's narrative framework is a sound one, presented with some above-average cinematography thanks to Hyung Bin Lee. The towering hotel's presentation and the pristine but atmospherically morose vibe that lingers in every shot is apparent throughout the film. The composition of scenes is also impressively structured, as every shot feels deliberate in its purpose. A spooky hotel isn't exactly the most original setting to explore the demons of one's past, but when it looks this good, it makes for a more than palatable setup. It's the contents of Lingering's narrative and scares that begin to wane considerably the longer we dive down the family's rabbit hole of secrets. What begins as flashbacks explaining Yumi's tangled web of a relationship with her mentally ill mother is quickly replaced with convoluted plot points and inconsequential characters. For instance, once the haunting begins, a teen boy is introduced and agrees to help Yumi with the spirit haunting her. This character is never explained, randomly appears, and lacks any context as to why he's compelled to help her. And after he confronts the haunting, which he had agreed to help her with, the boy becomes abusive towards Yumi for having him confront the spirit in the first place. This character then disappears, never to be seen again. It's never explained why he knows about the hauntings that are happening or how he can sense its presence. He moves an eye patch back and forth between his compromised eye and seeing eye to engage with the haunting. Again, this is never explained. It's a very jarring and strange sequence that does little more than facilitating one of the many meager scares that the film has. And now for a brief intermission. If you've been enjoying this episode of Daily Horror Habit, please take a moment to subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform or leaving a review on iTunes. And thank you for your continued support, which drives the show's success. And now, without further ado, let's get back to today's horrifying episode. Overall, scares run the gamut of blurry, ghostly apparitions appearing in mirrors, bodiless children's laughter reverberating around corridors, and ghostly faces just barely visible within the dark corners of rooms. With the exception of the film's opening scare, there's little here you haven't seen countless times before now. And honestly, it all feels pretty played out, given you can see a majority of the tepid scares coming before they actually present themselves. Which is a shame, given the composition of the shots is strong, but lacks the terrifying bite and originality that they need to truly be effective. I could overlook the run-of-the-mill scares if I had some semblance of investment in the overall narrative, which the viewer is never really given much incentive to. Other than Yoon Ji-Yu, who is, a child, virtually every other character is unlikable or lacks the range to convey the sympathy we're supposed to feel for them. Even our protagonist, who's grappling with a tumultuous past, very rarely emotes or is given us much reason to feel sympathetic for her, as she takes out her anger frequently on Yoon Ji-Yu. Furthermore, the film's mystery takes several needless convoluted turns, given how straightforward the conclusions reveal ends up being. which is disappointing given the film never capitalizes upon several cultural and societal issues it raises within Korean culture, such as the perception of women and the stigma surrounding mental illness. These themes are only ever given a surface level examination, when they could have been explored much more, giving the narrative more meaning rather than the film's generic plot beats. The film's finale also ends with yet more strange instances of convoluted and ambiguous storytelling. But when the adequate craft of the beginning of the film no longer props up scenes, this ambiguity leads to questions that I no longer care if they're actually answered. And the questions that this ending raises ultimately do not affect the entire previous hour and 20 minutes of the film, so I think it's fair to ask why to take this approach other than to apply unnecessary shock. At the end of the day, despite its promising beginning, Lingering is a meager haunted house tale that has far too many twists and turns for its own good, as well as scares that lack the punch they need. This would be difficult to recommend to most, as there are countless better haunted house tales out there with more original scares and engaging premises, such as His House, which is currently streaming on Netflix. So unfortunately, The Lingering isn't going to linger for much longer in my brain. But that'll do it for another episode of Daily Horror Habit. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another Daily Horror Movie Review. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram and @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.